Good morning, everyone. Friends, we're about to start. I'm going to stay a little bit further away today. I'm going around with a mask because my family and I are traveling soon. We are about to travel overseas and to go to Israel. So I'm being extra careful, and I hope everyone is being careful. Because I'm afraid that our flu and RSV and COVID, I'm afraid it's not quite over. And I'm hoping everyone is in good health, and I want to, before we even start, wish the people at home and wish us here a wonderful Hanukkah and a good 2023. I'm not going to be here to wish you a happy new year when the time comes. And thank you for joining us on this wintry morning. And a couple of other people are coming in, and that's great. But I look forward to ending this year, 2022, with this particular session and really completing it with, you know, what I hope is going to be kind of not only just a wrap-up, but something of a more hopeful note. So let's go with that. Let's hope that this is what we achieve. We're going to go for just about an hour, hopefully just over an hour. And since this is our last session in 2022, and since we're not going to be meeting on the first Sunday in January, and we're only going to be meeting then afterwards on the second Sunday in January, and then moving forward, I'm going to ask that you please interrupt me if you have any questions. Just let me know if you have any questions or comments as we go, because I really would like us to complete this session and in certain ways complete this unit that we've been looking at in terms of our liturgy. So let's try, shall we? Are we? Yeah? Let's try, let's move forward. As always, we're going to start with a little bit of a review. And then we're going to continue. We're going to move forward and continue. So these are the core questions, and I am asking us especially to look at question number 5 and 6. And to really think about questions 5 and 6, and to think about where we are in terms of our prayer and what our prayer and our liturgy and our language tells us about ourselves, about our culture, about who we are and our place in the world. And we're going to move forward and talk about where we've been here in terms of the Kedusha, but where we've been also in terms of the Kedusha, not only in the context of the Amidah, but in the context of everything that we've been learning about prayer. So let me raise this with you, and let me ask us to think about this in context. If you recall, at the very beginning of the semester, we started out looking at the morning blessings, the daily miracles section. And we talked about it as a preparation for prayer. We talked about it as where we're going in terms of preparation. And then we moved into the Shema. And we thought about the Shema, and we considered the Shema as a true pillar of our service. And we looked at the 3 paragraphs and at the material relating to the Shema. And I explained at the time that the Shema and the Amidah, the 18 blessings of the Amidah, what we call the Shmona Esrei, are, if you like, key. They are the 2 central pillars of our liturgy. There's, of course, everything else that occurs. Of course, there's the Kaddish, and there's the Baruch Hu, and there's the Mi Chamocha, and there's the Aleinu, and of course, we recite the Mishaberach and pray for healing. But liturgically, the Shema and the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah, are the 2 pillars of our service. And in the Amidah, the Kedusha is a pinnacle. It is very clearly a very special moment in the context of the Amidah. So instead of going through all the paragraphs of the Amidah, we went straight to the Kedusha to really think about the Kedusha alongside with the Shema, alongside with that pledge of allegiance that we looked at. And we saw that it contains a number of references to biblical texts. We saw Isaiah chapter 6, we saw Ezekiel chapter 3, and we started looking into these particular references and what they mean. And I think we were perhaps a little bit surprised by these references. We thought, this is what we're referring to, right? And we're going to talk about this for a moment. But what we looked at in terms of these references were two prophetic visions of God. And prophetic visions of God in ways that were inspiring on the one hand. Why inspiring on the one hand? Because flesh and blood prophets actually got to experience the divine, had a mystical experience. And what does this mean to us? It means to us that that kind of mystical experience was possible for human beings, that human beings were capable of attaining that kind of experience, that kind of mystical level of the experience of God. And on the other hand, they were also dispiriting. And they were dispiriting because what was the message of these encounters with the divine? The message of these two encounters with the divine, both in the case of Isaiah and in the case of Ezekiel, was the message of separation, of alienation, of the divine sphere, of what is going on, if you like, in terms of God's will and what is happening here in human affairs. And the notion that God has been trying and we have not been able to hear God's message. That God has wanted to speak with us and that we haven't been listening. And that now we have come to a point wherein God is sending prophets with the knowledge that we're not going to be able to hear them. And not only that, but as instruments of our confusion with regard to Isaiah. Remember that? And it is in that context that of that vision and of that message that Isaiah experiences those divine beings with the 6 wings and so on and so forth, going, holy, 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 saying to each other, holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts, right? And this is what we're reading in our Kedusha. And the same occurs with regard to Ezekiel. That element out of the prophecy of Ezekiel. The same thing happens. Okay? So this is where we are. This is our situation. And that tension is built into the Kedusha. It is built into this moment of sanctity. And it is built into this moment of sanctity saying, yes, human beings have had access, but we really, in terms of our human affairs, are very, very far from the divine vision of what the world ought to be and what we ought to be as a human society. Yes? Does all of this sounds familiar? Are we? Yeah, we're good. Okay. Good. Okay. So we looked into all of this, and I think we left with that sense of tension, and with that sense of incoherence, and with that sense of, if you like, misalignment between the divine sphere and our human sphere, and what is happening with us in the here and now. That was how we left it. Remember? And I want to go back into that spot, into that place, and think about what it is that we do and how it is that we understand the Kedusha. And talk about the Kedusha in the context of not only our textual liturgical practice and our textual references, but talk about the Kedusha also in the context of what we physically do when we read the Amidah and when we read the Kedusha. And what that signifies. So let me first of all start out by saying, what do we do when we launch upon the Tefillah, the Amidah, the 18 blessings? What do we do? We stand, and then we bow, right? And what do we do between standing and bowing in traditional Judaism? What is it that we do? When we say, Adonai sefatai tiftach, ufi yagid tehilatecha, we face the ark, right? What do we do? Does anyone remember? That we do a little, that we do in a moment. Candy, very good. Please hold on to that, right? Bear with me, right? What do we do? Adonai sefatai tiftach. I don't know, you've seen me do this, and traditional Jews do this. We step 3 steps forward, right? And then, when we say Baruch Atah Adonai, we bow down, and on Adonai, Baruch Atah, we bow, and Adonai, we return, right? Baruch, we bow. Atah, Adonai, we raise our heads, right? Facing the ark, but we step forward, right? And we step forward as if we were stepping forward to a royal audience, to the audience with a sovereign, right? And we bow down the way we would bow down in front of a sovereign when we say Baruch Atah Adonai. Yes? That is how we enter into the Amidah. That is how we enter into the Tefillah. This is how we enter into the Shmona Esrei. Right? This moment is the moment of our prayer. We don't do this for the Shema. Right? In fact, within traditional Judaism, the whole of the Shema were seated, including the very first verse of the Shema. Yes? Okay? For the Amidah, we're not only standing, but we stand. We have this ritual of stepping towards the ark, these 3 small steps. We bow down, we get up, right? And this is the beginning of the Avot and Imahot. Yes? Okay. Then we go through the Avot and Imahot, right? We speak of our ancestors. We recite this moment that allows us a moment of memory with regard to our ancestors, our fathers and our mothers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, right? And Sarah and Rebecca and Leah and Rachel. And we continue on to the notion of God as a life-giving force. Mechayeh hakol, the notion of God as the producer of the miracle of our lives. Yes? Which leads us to the Kedusha, to holiness. Now, by that time we're standing, we're facing the ark, we've been standing and facing the ark all this time. And what happens when we say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh? We lift our heels, right? You remember? We stand up toward the ark and we lift our heels. Why are we lifting our heels? What are we doing when we lift our heels? We are indicating that we are here, that God, and that what we are experiencing is that need for connection, that need for coming that little bit closer, for elevating ourselves toward God, toward the divine. Why do we feel that need? What are you telling us, Rabbi? That God isn't everywhere? That God isn't here and out there in the snow and in the... What are we doing elevating ourselves? We are, with our bodies, with our movements, indicating that tension between the separation, that sense of separation that we seek to address, that we seek to compensate for, that we seek to somehow undo, and on the other hand, our capacity to lift ourselves. Yes? Now do we understand why it is that we lift ourselves from our heels and step onto our toes and elevate our stature as we recite Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh? Judy.
Okay, so I went through Sunday school all through here. I never learned how to pray like this. Do you teach the kids in Sunday school classes how to do this?
Yes. The question is, Judy says correctly, we never learned this in Sunday school. I figured better late than never, right? We might as well learn a little bit now, right? We might as well acquire an introduction, right, to our Jewish liturgy now. I know many of us didn't learn this, and even those who do learn this, including our children in Sunday school, don't quite learn what we are learning. In other words, we don't teach them the tension and all these other difficult things that I think are more adult material than they're appropriate for children. But this is why we learn about it, right? But now we gain an understanding. You've seen us do this at services, right? You've seen your clergy do this. Now you know why. Now you know why it is that we do this, right? There are a number of really special things about the tefillah, about the Amidah, right? The Amidah can only take place, we can only say this, the Kedusha especially, right? The Kedusha we can only say fully, we can only say the Kedusha, recite it for ourselves when there is a minyan, when there are 10 people praying with us. Otherwise, we cannot say it. It requires a community. It requires 10 people. It elevates our sense of prayer. It cannot just be individual prayer. There's another formula for people praying on their own. I'm not going to go into the whole distinction between what happens with a minyan and what happens with an individual, but I am trying to get across the point that there is something really special about this piece of liturgy. And it is really special not only in terms of our motions, but in terms of the motions, in terms of the words, and in terms of what happens in the context of the tefillah. There's one more thing I want to mention. In traditional Judaism, people basically pray on their own, and there is a dynamic between the individual prayer and the public prayer. If you've ever gone into a traditional synagogue or into a traditional prayer minyan, people are praying at their pace, and you're seeing them praying at their pace, and most of the prayer is either silent or their own mumbling, and then there is the shliach tzibur, there is the chazan, there is the cantor, there's the person who prays for the public, who prays and who gives the people an indication of where we are, generally speaking, and who goes through the prayers and the blessings. There are a couple of points in the service wherein you are, as an individual, the individual Jew is expected to interrupt his or her prayer to join in with the shliach tzibur. One of them is the Kedusha. You stop what you're doing, the shliach tzibur, the cantor, the person who is praying on behalf of the community is doing the Kedusha. You stop what you're doing, you join in the Kedusha with the shliach tzibur. Right? It's an indication of the weight of this particular segment of the liturgy. Yes? And I could bring you the sources and the explanations of where this comes from, but we really don't have much time. And I'm trying to get across to you how special this moment in our liturgy is. Yes, Helga?
How was a minyan of 10 picked? For what purpose 10?
Great question. Why the number 10? And how were the 10 people picked? Traditional Judaism requires that the 10 people be 10 Jews, first of all, and 10 male Jews who are above bar mitzvah age, bar mitzvah or above. In other words, 10 people who know the commandments, who have taken upon themselves the commandments, and who now are responsible for their own religious lives. With Reform Judaism has said they do not have to be 10 men. They can be 10 men, and they can be people of different genders. So we do not accept that distinction between men and women. By the way, that is a whole other subject we can talk about. And the number of 10 arose within the context of classical Judaism as the minimum number for what would be considered a collective, a congregation. Unlike the exercise of learning that could take place with 2 or 3 people. 10 is the notion of minyan emerges, and we can talk about this later, and I can explain it, how exactly it emerges. I'm going to be very brief now for lack of time, but it emerges as what amounts to a congregation, in other words, a collective prayer. And when you have that minyan in traditional Judaism, by the way, if you go to a whole number of places where there are high concentrations of very traditional Jews, you will see there are synagogues, there are sometimes small synagogues that we call rooms, or what is called a shtibel, right, in Yiddish, right? In other words, basically a room, a synagogue, a small synagogue, where people stand outside and are looking for people to join the minyan, because if they don't join the minyan, there is that much less that we can do, right? We cannot take out the Torah, we cannot engage in the Kedusha, there are things we cannot do. Yes? Okay, there are other things we cannot do. I'm not going to go into the whole, right? But what I'm expressing here is that the Kedusha is especially important and especially significant within our service, and that it contains this tension within it. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that the Kedusha is part of Christian liturgy. The very same Kedusha is part of the Christian liturgy. We are about to listen and to see a rendition of the Kedusha in the Vespers of Claudio Monteverdi. Monteverdi lived at the end of the 16th and beginning of the 17th century. Most of his music is lost to us, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. The Vespers that we're going to be hearing the section of the Kedusha are out of the Vespers service that was composed in 1610. In other words, the evening service that was composed in 1610. He was at the time the musician for the court of Mantua. He then went off and became, the last 3 decades of his life, he spent in Venice as the musician in Venice. He was one of the pioneers and leaders of the Baroque movement. I want you to listen to it very carefully. Now, up to about minute 2 and 50 seconds, up to about 2 minutes and 50 seconds, you will hear the Kedusha straight. Afterwards, we will shift to Catholic liturgy that is associated with Vespers, and the notion of the Trinity is going to come up. This is where we part ways from Christianity, or Christianity has parted ways with us. This is their liturgy and not ours. And then we return to the Kedusha. I want you to see what Monteverdi made out of the Kedusha. You know how we pray the Kedusha, right? I want you to take a look at what Monteverdi has made of it. You ready? Okay. Monteverdi, the Vespers, the Kedusha. Wow, I think he's right. Now, I wanted you to see this because I wanted you to see how Monteverdi and others, but this moves me every single. I mean, I'm a fan of Monteverdi's. I'm not a fan of the philosophy of Catholic liturgy, but I'm a fan of Monteverdi's. This moves me every single time. I think you see what he's tried to achieve in terms of the seraphim, the angels in Isaiah chapter 6, speaking to each other. I think you're hearing this divine music, right? And then comes the phrase out of Ezekiel that says that the entire earth is filled with God's dignity. Meloch kol haaretz kevodo, right? In other words, on the one hand, this is divine music. On the other hand, what you have here is, wait a minute, this is all around us. This is here. The entire earth is filled with God's glory. But then we go up to the divine voices. And we go up to the notion of that conversation among angels, among divine beings, among seraphim, right? I think through the music, we understand the tension. The music and the way the music is composed and set here with Apollo's Fire in a recording that was made in 2010, I think it's revealing of something that is of a shared religious tradition. And that comes from, of course, our scriptures, from our Hebrew Bible, in terms of the Kedusha. This is the Kedusha. And of course, the Trinity in between, which is the Christian, the Catholic interpretation of where it is that they stand. And you saw the other singer coming in and taking his place, but this tension between the divine and the earthly. Yes, does that now resonate? Does this help? Yes, do we see what it is that we're and this profoundly, and think about this for a moment. These people coming to pray in what was often squalor, a world of difficulty, a world of squalor, a world that was unclean, a world that was difficult, to these glorious churches that were decorated and that were magnificent and that were larger structures than any other structure most people would ever enter into, that were impressive structures, to listen to this. Because they couldn't just listen to this on their iPods. Right? And think about the impact of this kind of liturgy and what this meant to people. Right? This is the Kedusha. Now, this is, in a sense, what the text, bless you, what the text is trying to reproduce and what the text is doing for us. And here in Monteverdi, and we're going to leave discussions about the Trinity and the Christian readings of this for another day, and they're not relevant to us. Is this helpful? Yes? You have a sense of, right? What for Monteverdi is the divine sound here in our midst, and that tension here in our midst. Yeah? Okay. Where do we go from here? What do we do with this? Where do we go? We go to the Psalms. And I'd like to go to especially 2 Psalms and to go back to the notion of the earth being filled with God's glory, to that piece of our liturgy, which comes from the book of Ezekiel. And we saw the citation out of the book of Ezekiel chapter 3. And in reality, chapters 1, 2, and 3 feed into each other, right? But I'd like to go into the Psalms, and I'd like us to think about that notion of dignity and how we respond to this tension. And I'd like to offer us 2 senses of the response to that tension. One of them does not offer any kind of direct citation with regard to the Kedusha. There is no immediate direct citation, but the idea is there. And in the other, there is a clear reference to the Kedusha. There is a direct citation. Okay? So now let me ask you this question. Anything else for the time being about the Kedusha or about Monteverdi, or should we, please?
Something else. Where does the Kaddish fit into all this? Because it's recited an awful lot of times.
where does the Kaddish fit in? I'm repeating the question. Where does the Kaddish fit into all of this? Right? What do we do with the Kaddish here? Because the Kaddish has similar and sometimes the same wording, and the idea is very much related. The Kaddish is its own set of sessions. The Kaddish is very difficult, very complicated, very challenging, extremely elevating. It is a masterpiece of liturgy. And if I had the time, I would explain this in conjunction with the Kaddish. And right now, I don't. And you are absolutely right to raise it. And thank goodness you did. Thank you for mentioning it. Because you are right, the Kaddish and the Kedusha are related. You're absolutely right. And one day when we return, following this December-January break, we will get to the Kaddish. I promise you we will get to the Kaddish. And we will circle back to this material. And you will see how they're related. But I cannot speak about the Kaddish right now. But thank you for asking the question. Yes? Okay. So yes, please. So here, I think that we would agree, right, Michael, that Monteverdi did well. He did okay. He did okay. You give him a B, C plus, B minus. Okay. Monteverdi did well. Monteverdi, and the music is elevating. The music is elevating. And we do not have that kind of music. Now, on Shabbat, according to traditional Judaism, we're not allowed to use musical instruments. And we're not allowed to use musical instruments because should something break, should any string break or anything like that, we would break the Sabbath if we brought another string and repaired it. So we're not allowed to use a musical instrument. But what do we rely on? We rely on the cantor's voice. We rely on the cantor's voice, but what also do we rely on beyond the cantor's voice? The text. It's the words of the text. It's that when I read the Kedusha, when I recite the Kedusha, when I'm at the Kedusha, my mind goes to Isaiah. My mind goes to the vision of Isaiah. Because I know the text. It is not just the music that is elevating. The image that is generated by the text is elevating. The cantor is elevating. And yes, there was liturgy that was produced by Jewish composers. And now we have liturgy that is being composed by Jewish composers. And now Reform Judaism is putting all of this to music. Right? And we've been doing that since the 19th century. In an organized, we've been producing Jewish liturgical music, but at the time that this was composed, you are absolutely right. At the time this was composed, we were with a text and with a cantor. And it wasn't that music that, even if we didn't understand the words, right, that the music would be so elevating to us. But people would listen to these words and would hear the seraphim speaking to each other. And by the way, already in those churches, they were separated by distance. And they were calling to each other, Sanctus, Sanctus, Holy, 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 Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And people did know People knew the words. Anyway, wonderful comment. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. Yes?
So, what happened to the tension part between in both Ezekiel and Isaac, the tension between God is asking them to essentially work with him in destroying the people?
So what so
Where did that go in all of this?
So we where did that go? So the question is, I'm going to repeat the question for the people back home yet again. As I repeat these comments and questions, I'm going to repeat this question. Where does the tension go in terms of the context of the actual mission of the prophecy, right? That context is not there. It is silent. It is silent also in our Kedusha. We don't give expression to that tension. But what does that tension give rise to for us? What does that context indicate to us? It indicates a separation between what is intended, what ought to be, and what is. And that tension is in the music, and it is in the words. And I want to further explain that tension through the Psalms. It's a great question. But let's take a look at this, and let's take a look at this through the Psalms. Okay? I'm going to go to a psalm that is David's last prayer. King David's last prayer. It says at the very end of the psalm, you will see, this is King David's last psalm. This is the last prayer. And whom does King David pray for? His son, King Solomon. And the success of the reign of his son, King Solomon. And how does he do this? How does he do this? And I want you to take a look at this. This is not only a king praying for another king. This is a father praying for a son. A parent praying for a child. Yes? Take a look at this. Take a look at what is happening here. God, endow the king, endow my son with your judgment, the king's son with your righteousness. May he, Solomon, may judge your people rightly, your lowly ones justly. Let the mountains produce now. So we are, bless my son, and on top of that, God, you are the one who produce well-being and plenty for the people, the hills, the rewards of justice. You, God, are the one who does that. But bless my son, who will also do justice, who will partner with you in your work, right? So you see, God is prayed for as a God of action in the world, but I am praying for my son. I'm praying for King Solomon. You see that? Right from the very beginning of Psalm 72. It's not very long, right? And how is he going to do that, my son Solomon? He will champion the lowly. He will do justice with the poor, with the meek, with the weak. And he will fight for them and defeat those who try to oppress them unjustly, unlawfully. Yes? This is what he's going to do, my son Solomon, right? And then, look, God, you are the creator. You are in charge of the sun and the shining of the sun and the moon to the end of all generations, right? God, I'm asking you because I understand you as being the God creator, right? And pour down that rain onto us. That rain of creation and that rain of justice, right? So that we may experience plenty and righteousness here in the world, right? And look here, God, let my son rule from sea to sea as your partner, yes? From the river to the ends of the earth, expand my son's kingdom, that he may not just be a king, but that my son may become an emperor, that he may rule the entire earth. And through my son ruling everywhere, your kingdom will be given reality in the world. Yes? Do you see that? Do you see what King David is praying for? Am I making sense here? Does that? Yes? Okay. Now, let everybody worship my son. Let everybody bring gifts. Let everybody give tribute. Let everybody take taxes to him, right? Let all the nations serve him, right? But why? To what end? Because my son will do justice. The king will do justice for the needy, for the poor, for the oppressed. The king will do God's justice, right? In other words, what are we talking about here? What is King David praying for here? Partnership. The partnership of God with King Solomon, his son. And King Solomon's success and growth and expansion through that partnership. Do you see this? Do you see what is going on here? Yes? And we're nearing the end of this, not quite, but nearing the end of this, right? My son will redeem everybody from fraud and lawlessness, and, our societies and cities and neighborhoods will be safe, law and order and safety and justice and righteousness. Everything will be good. Everything would work, right? And so let the king receive the gold from Africa. Let the king receive the gifts from all these other places, right? And you, God, produce abundant grain. Here you see all the elements coming together within the space of a couple of verses. Let all of that happen together. Let that partnership work. You, God, do your part. The nations will do their part. My son, the king, will do his part. Everything will work out. And he can rule everywhere, from the river to the sea to the whole world, all these nations, everybody will. This will be the great success. Your kingdom will appear here on earth. That's a great vision, especially for Solomon, right? But great vision for everybody, right? And for the poor and the meek and the righteous and all of that. Yes? Okay, so may Solomon's name be eternal. May Solomon and his descendants, in other words, may my dynasty be eternal. Who doesn't want this? Right? For us, through our children, to live forever, right? Who doesn't want this? May this be eternal, right? And let all the nations, right, count him happy, right? But, what is this about? It is about you, God, the sovereign God, the God of Israel, who alone does wondrous things. And here comes the idea that is at the very core of this last prayer of David. Last prayer of King David, the last psalm. Blessed is God's glorious name forever. Baruch Kvod Adonai Le'olam, it says, right? Blessed is God's dignity, God's honor forever, right? Which is very close to what we say in the Kedusha, right? Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, right? Very, very close, right? God's glory fills the whole world, right? Again, the same idea that we read in Ezekiel, Amen and Amen, Amen ve'Amen, the psalm ends. And it says then, and that's what it actually says in chapter 72 of the Psalms, this concludes the Psalms, this concludes the prayers of King David, of David. What it says, so we know. This is it. This is his last prayer. What do you think? Not bad. Yeah? Right?
Is there a prescription as to when these prayers are supposed to be recited?
No, this is a private prayer. That wonderful question. The question is there a prescription for when this kind of prayer needs to be recited, right? And the answer is no. This is David's private prayer to God, right? This is not part of Shacharit or part of, this is not, no, this is David's private prayer to God. But do you remember we just talked about the tension, about the separation of the divine from the reality, right? What does King David propose here? What is the proposition of the psalm? We can connect. We can undo that separation. And how do we undo that separation? Through a true partnership between God and our ruler, who is going to do justice. Yes? Yes? You see what King David is saying? King David knows the separation. He understands the separation. He knows the world is not what the world ought to be. He understands this. He understands that he is a sinner. We are all sinners. We live it in our daily lives, right? But there is a way. God help us find the way. There is a way to partnership, right? There is a way to partnership. Difficult. Difficult. Realistic? I don't know. Difficult. Challenging. But look at this dream. Look at this dream, yes.
Just to piggyback on that question, are the Psalms ever woven into congregational prayer, or is this meant to be part of your own individual learning as a Jew? And your own spiritual, your own source of prayer?
So, are the Psalms weaved into prayer? Right? As a congregation. Or is this supposed to be part of our prayer practice individually, our learning practice, our meditation practice as Jews? Are we? The answer to your question, Alina, is yes. Yes, the answer is yes. The Ashrei יושבי ביתך, עוד יהללוך סלע, אשרי העם שככה לא אשרי העם שאדוני אלוהיו. The Ashrei is a psalm, incorporated completely, right? Chapter 149 of the Psalms, 148, 149, but these pieces are incorporated in full into our prayer service. And I have another answer for you. Coming right up. Here is the other answer. And with regard to those psalms that are not incorporated into the liturgy, yes, some of us read them all the time. And they are part of our practice. And they are part of our thinking. And they are part of our meditation. And really the psalms are the core of personal prayer. They're the beginning of what is biblically recorded, right, as organized, systematic, personal and communal prayer. Yes? And we can talk about that further. We mentioned it before, but look at this, right? Take a look at Psalm 146. Now, Psalm 146 is unlike Psalm 72 and is part of our Kedusha. Now you're going to see how, right? And we start Psalm 146. There are only 150 Psalms. We're toward the end of the book here. We're very close to the Ashrei, right? Hallelujah, praise God, O my soul. I will praise God all my life. Sing hymns to my God while I am. In other words, while I endure, while I am here on the earth. While I am, right? Be'odi, it says, right? Place not your trust in the generous. Look at what it says. Place not your trust in the generous, in our champions, in mortals who cannot save, who cannot redeem, who cannot rescue, is what the psalm says. Their breath departs. They return to the dust. On that day, their plans come to nothing. Right? Yes? The psalmist says to King David, what does he say to King David? Difficult. Wait a minute. We are mere mortals. We are flesh and blood. Don't place your trust in flesh and blood because we're vulnerable. We are flesh and blood. Happy is the person who has the God of Jacob for her or his help whose hope is in his or her God, maker of heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, who keeps the faith forever. Whom shall we trust? We cannot trust human beings. What can we trust? What is the only thing out there that is eternal? It's only God. Don't trust human beings. Trust God. God who secures justice for the wronged. God who gives food to the hungry. God sets the prisoners free. God restores the sight to the blind. God makes those who are bent stand straight. God who loves the righteous. Here is part of your answer. This is Birkot HaShachar. These are the morning blessings, are taken from these ideas in the Psalms, which we recite every single morning. You look at the daily miracles section of our liturgy of Mishkan Tefillah, this is where these ideas come from. Yes? Okay, but what is the source of this strength? What is the source of all of this? It is only God, right? God watches over the stranger. God offers courage to the orphan and the widow, but makes the path of the wicked tortuous. God takes care of everything. It's not us. Don't put your trust in King Solomon. Don't put the trust in a king. Don't put your trust in the generous. Don't put your trust in your donors. Don't put your trust in those champions. They're mortals. They're going to go away. They're not, at the end of the day, reliable. And how does the psalm end? How does the psalm end? Our sovereign God shall reign forever. Your God, O Zion, for all generations, hallelujah, which we read at the end of our Kedusha. This is the conclusion of our Kedusha. And so, what is the conclusion of our Kedusha? What do we say in the conclusion to our Kedusha? What is our response to that tension? We want partnership. We want to be able to raise ourselves on our tiptoes, on our heels up. We want that closeness. We know that that closeness is theoretically possible because prophets have experienced God. We know that flesh and blood could possibly get there. Difficult. Difficult. Not so easy. What do we have left? What is left for us? Hope, trust, faith. And our faith, our trust, our hope only have one destination. Do not be confused. Do not be led by those things or people who are going to solve all our problems. Karl Marx, everything will be resolved if only we follow the prescription, everything will be great. No, not really. All kinds of others. Where is our trust? What is the only worthy destination of our trust, of our faith, of our hope? The only worthy destination is God. And this is our faith. Now, Marie, I'm going to be with you in a moment. Now, let's talk for a moment about the Kedusha in the context of the Shema. What did we learn about the Shema? The Shema is the pledge of allegiance. our Jewish pledge of allegiance to God. It's modeled after other pledges of allegiance. It contains ideas that relate to other pledges of allegiance that occurred in the ancient Near East in the second and first millennium before the Common Era. We saw all of that, but what is it at the end of the day? It is our deep, wholehearted pledge of allegiance to an eternal God. Why? Because we are called upon to do God's work here. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. You shall love your God with all your strength, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, here on earth. היו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך על לבביך. Here, and put them, implant them into your heart. ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם. Speak to your children and recite and repeat to your children. When you're sitting at home and when you're on your way. This is not up there in heaven. Here, in your home, on your way, in the house, in the field. Right? Where are we with the Kedusha? We said, these are the two pillars of Jewish liturgy. Where are we with the Kedusha? Yes, and we need to recognize that the world is not what the world ought to be. That unless we recognize that the world ought to be different from what it is, we're not seeing God. We're not hearing God's message. And that the path is a path of trust and hope and faith in God. And that God is, at the end of the day, in spite of the distance, in spite of the difficulty, the true address of our faith. This, in a nutshell, in 2 hours and 25 minutes of our two sessions last week and this week, is our introduction to the Kedusha. This is the basic core meaning of the Kedusha. And this is why it is a central pillar of our service. Yes?
But that is very little consolation to the people who marched to their death in a concentration camp.
The people, Helga, this is very little consolation to the people who marched to their death in concentration camps. You are absolutely right. This is of very little consolation. And the people who marched to their deaths in concentration camps are a constant reminder to us, all the time, on our minds and in our hearts, of the darkness, of the horror, of the evil that this world can descend into. And what I think Isaiah would say to you, and what I think Ezekiel would say to you, and what I venture to guess, even Monteverdi would say to you, the will of God is holy, 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 is the God of hosts, Adonai Tzevaot. Melo chol haaretz kevodo, at its best, the world, our world, is filled with God's dignity. And herein lies the distance, the gap, the darkness. And in the face of that gap, in the face of that distance, in the face of that darkness, we cannot fix it. We cannot undo it. We cannot be unrealistic. And this is the gift of Judaism. Judaism is real. This is not escapism. This is our lives. And there's only one answer: faith. Faith in ongoing life. Faith in God, faith in goodness, and in our capacity for goodness, and in the world's capacity, therefore, to move towards redemption. Marie, I know you were waiting.
Well, I argue with my mom about this all the time, but I think it sounds really cynical to say don't put your faith in people. I do, I think it's cynical. Don't put all your faith in people.
Well, the question is a really great question. The question is a really great question. Marie, I'm going to take a moment to respond to your question because it's so important, and then we will conclude. There is a cynicism that comes across in saying, don't put your faith in people. There's a cynicism about this. I want you to hear this a little bit differently. I want to encourage us to hear this a little bit differently. When I make an agreement with another person, I think there is an expectation from the other, on the part of the other party and on my part, that we will fulfill the expectations we set of each other. If I'm supposed to pay rent by a particular time, I need to pay my rent. There is a basic level of trust and of confidence that we must have in each other. And what we're not saying here is don't sign any contract with anybody. Don't enter into any relationship with anybody because nobody can be trusted. Because you can have zero confidence in anybody. That is not what we're saying. What we are saying and what we are experiencing here is that notion of faith that a person or a thing will redeem us and resolve the core problems of the human condition. And that is not right. There were people across history who felt that way about other people. Yes, including a whole number that we could mention here. What will resolve our problem? Capitalism, Marxism, socialism, this, that, or the other. No. No. That is misplaced faith, says the psalmist. That, in a sense, if you like, and I'm going to be too direct about this, is almost an expression of idolatry. With regard to those elements of our core human condition, the condition of the world, what is the address of our faith?
So that's like, I have another friend who says, Murray, don't put people on a pedestal.
We have to be mindful of pedestals. We have to be mindful of pedestals. But that does not mean loss of faith.
Thank you.
Because faith is our capacity to understand that there is something better, and that our world is already better than it used to be, and that there is a capacity in us to move towards better. And that comes from somewhere. And that's that trust and that hope and that faith. And that's what we have. And it is powerful. And that is the Kedusha. And that's what I wanted to share with you today.
So that's the power to transcend.
Yes. Okay. And with that, I wish you a happy Hanukkah
Thank you so much.
and a wonderful 2023. And I look forward to seeing you in January.